Greetings, family. We are here with another broadcast of I Speaks, Building a New Legacy. And this is your host, Queen Mother, Dr. ChenziRa. I'm really excited to be able to say that we're going to have a very informative broadcast this evening, sharing, a little bit word sound power that's connected to some of the vibes, some of the energy that we bring to the table. We want to make sure that we highlight the importance of us speaking truth to power, and at the same time, making sure that we can bring up that energy of Africa, we love you. Africa, we love you. Africa, we love you. So let's take a moment.
Africa, we love you. Because now we understand how they pushed and shoved you into the dimly lit corners of their history book. But we know the truth, cause we've searched and looked to lift our minds off of Europe's hook. Some still don't understand how much strength and willpower it took to get from under their spells and propaganda. And now them a wonder how we so proud and we thy sheikies and we boopa. We let them know we were orphaned, but we found our mother. We've been reunited with our lost sisters and brothers.
And we're going to pause it there, listening to Africa, We Love You, a track from Artist Chemistry by the illustrious, award-winning spoken word artist and scholar, among other things, Brother Adrian Green, out of our community in Barbados, here in the Caribbean. So this evening, we're doing something a little different. Some persons are accustomed to seeing us do broadcasts at a particular time around a particular context. And building a new legacy means that we do exactly that. We speak around issues that are actively engaged. So first and foremost, we'd like to make sure that we highlight today in the history annals of African people in this hemisphere, impacting the entire globe, is one of the days, the founding of the Universal Negro Improvement Association African Communities League by the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey. And again, when we say Garvey, and we speak of the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey, we have to speak of Amy Ashwood Garvey, Amy Jacks Garvey, and a host of other persons that worked in concert with the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey. Tonight, I'm really excited because we also have with us the President General of the Universal Negro Improvement Association African Communities League Rehabilitating Committee. Did you get all of that? UNIAACLRC 2020, none other than the Honorable, and I always refer to him as Baba. PG after that, but Baba first. PG Akili Nkrumah. Thank you so much for joining us and just being willing to pull together some reflection, some commentary as we highlight, some of the history linked to the founding of the UNIAACL in 1914.
Ashe, my sister queen, I am most honored to have opportunity to speak truth to power and to reflect on the beginning of the UNIA, but a continuation of the rise of African people to their rightful place. Mm-hmm. So I'm honored. Give thanks.
Give thanks. And just so that we're always in a context of what all else is going on in the Earth community, we know that this is a time where a number of our sisters and brothers in this hemisphere are really in shock, if you will, just collecting ourselves, collecting our thoughts for those persons that have contributed to the African cause, whether it's through fundamentalism, whether it's through Black power and human rights. And so there's a significant conversation impacting our region especially in this side of the Atlantic, with persons just holding strength, holding context to the sudden passing of a powerful woman, one that contributed significantly to efforts in specifically the 48 contiguous US, known as a really powerful voice for justice, one that used her role within US as a US representative, within Congress, voting against certain acts and injustices, and just a champion for true humanity, right? And I think it's important when people like to refer to her as sister as well as mother, Sheila. But I think it's really important that we recognize that U.S. Representative or former U.S. Representative Sheila Jackson Lee has become an ancestor. And so we definitely want to send words of strength, comforting, heartfelt prayers to the family. I say family, the friends and the family and everyone in between, the persons that she served, the agencies that she has left a legacy for. So I just wanted to take a moment to just honor her greatness, her contributions
Ashe.
to volunteer.
Ashe. Ashe.
Right. So, and around this time, there's also been, a number of activities. We know that this year has marked a lot of births and a lot of anniversaries. So in addition to the anniversary of the Caribbean Pan-African Network that was formed in September, again, 20 years ago, I tell everybody to do the math, on the outskirts of the World Conference Against Racism in South Africa, civil society networks being built and structured in a lot of contexts, various Pan-African commissions being established not only in the Caribbean, but literally just strengthening throughout the world and the globe. And again, the UNIA, members of the UNIAACL, persons influenced by Garveyism, people moving around African fundamentalism, these were things that impacted that. And it's also reached the height this week and even today with the African Union, ECOSOC, hosting its convening in Accra, Ghana, earlier this week, and closing out with various side events by the African Union, African Diaspora Collective that's really bringing this high council concept. So you'll hear people talk about BLESS, the AUADS. And I'm very clear that that's part of what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about that a little bit more after we get into the essence of learning a little bit more about the founding of the UNIA-ACL. So I'd like to pose, it's not a question, but just an open conversation with you, PG and Nkrumah, around this founding of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, African Communities League, chartered by the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey and a team of persons blessed in 1914.
In 1914, after his world tour and return to Jamaica, Garvey sat down with members or people to establish the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League. One of those members was Amy Ashwood, who became Amy Ashwood Garvey. We need to understand that, or we should appreciate, that Garvey's travels around the world, Garvey's experiences, Garvey's reading, helped to build within him the knowledge and desire to establish for people of African descent a government that could bring about the liberation of Africa and therefore the freedom of African people. He knew it would not be easy. So initially, the UNIA-ACL was exactly an organization which was established in Jamaica, July 20th, 1914. In establishing the ACL and establishing the UNIA, because we say that, Garvey recognized that that platform in Jamaica was not going to be enough to elevate the concept of building the government for people of African descent to impact the situation or the conditions of African people worldwide. And therefore, he traveled to the United States and went to work to rebirth the UNIAACL on these shores.
Mhm.
So it started as an organization with its mission of building educational institutions to change the conditions of African people on the island of Jamaica.
Mhm.
The Garvey recognized that that was not enough to impact the race.
Mhm.
Coming to America, Garvey realized and recognized that this would be the place in order to spearhead the motivation to change the condition of African people. He saw this as a launching pad. Yes, he did come to learn about Tuskegee Institution because education was also key in Garvey's philosophy. Let us not forget that his desire was to educate the African people on the island of Jamaica so that they could become the instrumental force to bring about change. But he also recognized that African people worldwide needed a foundation. So he came here first to get the information on building an institution and then recognize that the mission was far greater and required far more work and far more commitment. And in doing that, Garvey began to build here in the United States of America the foundation of the UNIA ACL. It started in Jamaica in 1914, launched here in America in 1917, and has become a worldwide institution that is now currently being led by the UNIAACLRC 2020. Because as Garvey saw the rehabilitation in 1926, we saw the rehabilitation in 2020. And not only a rehabilitation of the organization, but a rehabilitation of our race, and therefore bringing about racial changes and consciousness amongst us as African people. Our legacy stands on the role and the works of the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey. Let there not be any misunderstanding that this is about the race. It's not about an organization, but it is about the governmental structure that was developed and implemented under our Constitution, under the Constitution and bylaws of the UNIA from 1926 forward. See, and that's important because folks want to not claim the time changes. Garvey grew. The UNIA grew. Garvey learned. The UNIA gained from his knowledge and his learning. So that when we look at today, 1920, as a beginning, I would say the beginning was as Garvey traveled the world before the founding of the organization. Within him was the beginning. Because within him, he recognized that African people worldwide were not considered equals in this world. Today, in 2024, our situation is not changed, has not changed. We're still not considered equal, although we are given a different role, and we play that role in a manner of being the creators of our own subjectness. And that's what the UNIA stood against.
Right. Well, I'm grateful that you put it in that context for a couple of reasons, because many persons will speak of the UNIA in generalizations and tend to feel that it was an organization of the 20th century and that it hasn't continued and that there aren't engaging manifestations of the UNIA in the 21st century, which is not accurate. I also want to highlight for some persons, like it's very easy to go and we can easily Google Metacrawler, Google Scholar, research. There's a number of publications that will provide some of the chronology. And I know that sometimes the chronology may not be as accurate. So some people may say that, yes, it was formed in 1914. However, when we, just like you just described, he was already on the movement of reaching out, going into England, going into Central America, as well as the 48 contiguous US, engaging with persons that were hearing of this movement in its formative stages from even before 1914.
Yes.
So I think it's really important for persons to be clear on that, and then to know that this movement really, I'm going to use the term percolated, was really developing, it was increasing membership, with things that were happening in New York City, and especially between, let's say, the highlight what people speak of is usually like 1918, 1919 till 1926, and we can speak to what transpired at that time later. However, it's important that people know that the government,
Yes.
not just the organization part, but the government with an intention to build in Africa a Black governed nation. I think people need to get that. That's
Yes.
the intention. Yes. Yes.
It's because 1920 convention in New York City, Garvey was elected the provisional president of the continent of Africa. The government was established. We didn't just establish the organization. We established the government because we didn't put together like bylaws or rules. We put together a constitution for people of African descent. We then put together, of course, the Bill of Rights for Negro peoples of the world based on our conditions in 1920. We are here in 2024. We will be revisiting and reestablishing the Negro rights of the world because there can be no mistake. White folks, as in 1920, and our convention, white folks in 2024 are at the same point they were then. This is a step to eliminate, annihilate, and remove people of African descent from the landscape, and people of color as well. It's no joke that America is now on the precipice of becoming one of the most racist nations to exist. It's always been a racist nation. Let me be clear. But it's on the precipice of being the most racist nation. And you say, how can it be the most racist nation? Because although England and France and Italy, other white countries are racist in their totality, America wants to now eliminate all people of color from its shores. Mm-hmm. So that it can be the essential white nation. We need to pay attention. We need to be understanding that what Marcus Messiah Garvey and the men and women of 1920 established was a government to see fit that people of African descent not just had a place to go, but a government and a home to speak for them, so that in the world affairs, we were not sitting on the sideline. I know African countries are a part of the UN, but I say this to those who see this. African people in the UN are there in a subservient role. Because if you look at the powers of the UN, they rest with approximately 7 countries. None of them are of African descent. Understand. Let's change the dynamics in the world by understanding not just our history, but our truths and the mission that was set before us and what we have to change.
Right. And that's why, as you're saying what you're saying, PG, Akili and Nkrumah, that it's important. Like, I'm placing certain links so that persons, because we may not be able to cover every single element of some of the formative portions of the development of the UNIAACL. It's important for persons to recognize, however, that there was a collective that worked through the efforts of the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey. And we mentioned in the founding element, Amy Ashwood Garvey, and then there's Henrietta Vinton Davis. I mean, there's a number of persons that need to be to that list. And then we know that as he developed the shift, or I should say the internationalization, or more correctly, the globalization of the UNIAACL, and where the membership shifted from, this small circle in Jamaica, or this small circle of persons, because you had persons, again, in Central America, the 48 throughout the Americas, right? Persons listening and hearing, tuning into his conversations as he was developing and strengthening relationships, in the UK, which influenced other parts of Europe. And we need to remember that this was happening across, it wasn't just English, This
No,
was happening
cross
across,
languages.
yes, many languages
Yes.
throughout the globe. So I think it's really important that persons acknowledge, recognize, highlight that. I think it's also important to know that while this was going on, there were publications, you know, so when people think of
Yes.
the UNIA, you have to also go and reflect on the Negro world. You know, he
Yes.
served whether people want to acknowledge it or not, the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey was a very skilled, I want to highlight that, very skilled journalist before we formalized all these tactics and strategies.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
First, let's also give credit and praises to Amy Actus Jarvie. I'm holding up what's called The Black Man, was in one of the newsletters that the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey was able to pen after he had been removed from the U.S. and it was established himself in Jamaica. I hold this up because of the point that you made about Garvey was more than just speeches. He was absolutely literature. And the point is that he reached across the world. The Black Man, just as the newsletter that was printed by Garvey was in various languages, it was banned in South Africa because they were afraid of its revolutionary content. Garvey and the men and women that worked with him were today's 2024 international news media in the 1900s.
Right. That was our TikTok. That was our TikTok of the early 20th century. That was our Facebook.
They were the TikTok. That's right. They were the TikTok because they was pushing the message. You see, people don't understand or don't really try to understand the breadth of Marcus Messiah Garvey and the movement, and therefore the government, not just the organization of the UNIAACL, but the government. Because what we represent is the government, not just the organization, but the government of the UNIAACL under RC 2020. Garvey being deported from America in 1926, he reestablished the UNIAACL of 1929 of the world as the government. Because what he recognized is he needed to stand on a level, and that level was he needed to speak to presidents and other leaders of the world in the proper voice. Because you see, they targeted the UNIA specifically because they were afraid of the rise of Negro people. Today, let the world recognize that today America is afraid of the same thing. They're afraid of the rise of people of African descent and people of color. They are afraid of that rise, which is why they push a MAGA theory of making sure that they put everyone other than white folks under the thumb of white people. They did that in the 1920s as well. After the liberation, they called it Jim Crow. They called it those rules to try to circumvent us. And then they called it, prejudice. And then they called it segregation. Let's get clear. All of this, even the MAGA movement of 2024, is to subservient, push people of African descent to where they are no longer relevant. With all of the African governments that exist, America and the white world is afraid of the UNIAACL, now RC 2020. They are afraid of the consciousness and the level that African people can achieve once we come together and recognize that they ain't for you.
And that's the part that I think is really critical, that many persons are not ready to engage in that level of understanding of where the UNIA or any organization that supports African fundamentalism or any organization that's Pan-African or global African or Black conscious, etc. Right? That seems to be an ongoing piece. So I've also placed in our chats and definitely in the various media platforms that we've given access to some information on the Constitution of the UNIA, so the persons can see how the Constitution has been formed, and of course that there have been amendments, as the PG has shared. I just think it's important that people get an idea of what was the governance element of the government portion of the UNIAACL. ACL. And then, of course, looking at that 1920 Declaration of the Rights of the Negro Peoples of the World. And again, 1920, and we're speaking over 100 years later, and we're still struggling, navigate. Well, let me rephrase. Some of our people, most of the ruling class, are struggling to see that this is a document, a primary document, I should say, that has given some very clear processes, protocols, procedures that
Yes.
are principled around how Africans, in those times we would say the term Negro, but just knowing that people convened from the 1st of August through the 31st of August
Yes.
in New York City. I just think people should navigate that, and that this was going on. And of course, there were different protests and all kinds of stuff happening. It wasn't like everybody was safe and everything was beautiful. There were people protesting with all these Black people, African people, being in a convention
Yeah.
for an entire month.
In New York City,
Okay.
in Madison Square Garden.
Okay.
See, let's put it in context.
Okay.
Over 20,000 people of African descent from around the world.
Okay.
I believe the number was closer to 25, but I'm gonna rest with 20.
Mhm.
They were able to come to this country by way of boat, no airplanes.
Mhm.
They were here for over 30 days because there was no boat or ship to take them home.
Mhm.
They had to spend time with each other.
Mhm.
They
Home
couldn't
stay.
go, they couldn't go to hotels,
Right.
no Airbnbs. You had to rest assured that you could live with another person of African descent that was already here. I just want to speak to those conditions for this purpose. Because you see, when they came together in convention, even though I'm sure they were not 100% in all alignment, they came together to align first the Constitution. They built a constitution for Negro people that has not been done since. They then put together the rights of Negro peoples of the world, which again has not been done since. And then they established Marcus Messiah Garvey of the provisional president of the continent of Africa. It has not been done since. So you're talking about 1920. We in 2024. That's 104 years from then. And we have not been able to move the needle to a point to where we as African people are on the continent of Africa, around the world, building, development, a government to replicate the governmental structure that was done in 1920. I'll say and I'll say and I'll say again, just for the record. Understanding, it is not that we are unable, it is that we have to believe. And then once you believe, you will know. Because if you follow the path of the ancestors, building a government for African people is essential. Not building individual state units. That was America's ploy with Liberia, America's colony, although America said they didn't have no colonies. That was the ploy of Germany and Britain and France. And they have yet to take their tentacles out of Africa to the point to where Africa's foundation, its earth, is being poisoned because that philosophy has yet to been rejected. I say the world has to accept the concept of the UNIAACL under RC 2020 of the belief that the ancestors knew best.
Yes. Yes. I could see that. And I think this helps me to put some context because I would like to make sure that you continue to share some of the historical context of how the UNIA ACL had been established in the 20th century, and then speak to some of the contemporary 21st century elements with the UNIA ACL RC 2020. And I just wanted to share and in context, bringing these things forward. A lot of times, what had happened in the 20th century, good, bad, or indifferent, one of the challenges we have is that even though we're in crisis, in the 21st century, the powers that be, the machinery that governs most of the world powers and world communities, make it appear like there's some false sense of unity or some false sense of security. So persons don't have, people aren't being lynched in the manner they were being lynched in the 20th century, even though they're still being lynched physically, psychologically, spiritually, etc. But it's done in such a more subtle manner in many instances that most people, it took like a major shift, like what we're seeing in places like Kenya now, where the youth are just on fire, and they're not accepting, they're just not tolerating, not even tolerance, they're just not accepting, allowing any of these inequities to continue, period. If it means burn everything to the ground, if it means shut everything down. And to some people, oh, the youth are just losing their mind and they have no order and they have no sense of loyalty. And that's not necessarily what's happening. It's that they've been triggered. This level, it's been a triggering. And I'm just using Kenya as an example.
I agree with you.
And I see some other spaces. Yeah, I do.
Because I believe the trigger of the youth has been a reality that we need our own government that governs for us based on our reality, based on our conditions, based on our situations. If we are to change Africa, Kenya may be a beginning stage, but it's not the only stage. It has to become across the board, because every African nation state, as I call it, has a European overseer in one way or another.
Right.
And so we have to develop an African framework for an African government that governs the continent of Africa, so that our mineral wealth serves us, that our resources serves us, that our government serves us, that if we have a military, that it serves us, that if we have law enforcement, it serves us. We have to begin to do as the rest of the world has done, which is to make sure that our interest is first. It can't be that we depend on America, England, and France because they will rape us, unequivocally rape us, and therefore force disunity because you speak one language, I speak one language, your governmental structure is different, my governmental structure, and we're on the same continent. We have to remove those barriers. We have to understand that to get to where we are in 2024, our subjugation from those colonizing forces have to be removed. We have not removed them. See, so you may have removed some of the physical change, but you have not removed the mental and intellectual changes that are important for the movement forward. Our youth, and I know they call them Generation Z, that youthful process on Kenya is the fire starter. The fire starter. Because this is going to burn across the continent and across the world. Because America is attempting to go backwards, and the rest of Europe will follow her, and following her to where subjugation of people of African descent becomes the norm. Hell no. Our generation is saying, I'm not Generation Z, but hell no, we will not submit. The Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey and the men and women of the UNIAACL and now RC2020, its legacy, said, hell no, look for me in the whirlwind. I will be the real Marcus Messiah Garvey. I will bring forth tens of thousands of African people in order to change the world. Our spirits rise. And we rise high because we stand on truth. When you stand on truth, the only thing that can prevent you is more truth. And that truth will support us and not prevent us. Truth.
Right. Give thanks for that, because my eye always stays in the forefront as
Yeah.
truth, justice, order, reciprocity, balance, divine righteousness, and harmony. So I wanted to like compartmentalize a couple of things that you were sharing, because I know we could have this conversation till tomorrow and easily keep it moving. I just felt that it was really important to highlight certain things that are happening, yes, on this side of the Atlantic Ocean,
Mm-hmm.
and what people like to call the diaspora. And after today, I had an experience, and I want to give a special shout out to another Baba, Dr. David Horn, for just listening. It wasn't so much I was venting, I just needed to process how this term diaspora keeps kind of placing some of us that are African clearly comfortable in our ancestral, ancient African space
Yes.
as the original ones. You know, whether we say Negro in the context of the UNIAACLRC 2020, whether we say Black in terms of Black African fundamentalism and the Black nationalist Black movement, but essentially seeing ourselves as the original ancestral ancient Africans,
Yes.
and the connection to that. But I wanted to share something that came again from a very different, let me not say different, from a very complementary space that to some people may seem out of the flow of what I'm speaking of, but it was something shared with us today because there's a lot going on around repatriation, our sisters and brothers that are doing exactly what Garvey encouraged in terms of, yes, look for him in the whirlwind, but also stretching forth his hand in
Yes.
regard to the connection between Africa and other parts of the globe. And so there's brothers and sisters that have firsthand lived experiences leaving the West or Europe and actually residing and living and making their physical home in the 12 million square mile continent of Africa. And then some may have relationships with Africa and their heartstrings are there. However, based on their work, their spaces of recreation, their family groundings, they choose to stay in the diaspora. And I use that term diaspora because we need to come up with a different term.
Absolutely.
So that we no longer are seen as outsiders or
Yes.
foreigners to our ancestral homelands. I'm going to come back to that in a second. So with that being said, and with a more politically, ideologically strong perspective, one of our comrades and brethren who has been leading many of the efforts around the Caribbean regional organizing that's more Pan-African, and I want to highlight that our brother Felipe Noguera in Trinidad and Tobago, he shared a particular message inside of one of our social media groups, particularly within WhatsApp, but I see that people are sharing it in Telegram, Facebook, Twitter, Stumble Upon, and TikTok. I'm just waiting for the video. And I believe he's also prepared a video as well. But I want to share this to give some context to what we've just been talking about. And he said, and I quote Brother Felipe, our comrade, our revolutionary comrade, I have refrained from much comment on the very heated debate related to, but implying more than the cultural and epistemological differences between Islam and Rastafari revolutionary paths. But when it becomes acrimonious, I think we can tell his intellectual engagement. And personal, as the coordinator, I have the responsibility to insist that the concept unity, struggle, unity prevail as Pan-African revolutionary activists from the Caribbean who are offering the service of leadership to our people. We need not agree on religion, philosophy, ontology, as long as we agree to unite our people against our oppressors. How do we lead the march towards victory waving the Garvey banner or the Nkrumah banner, the Malcolm X banner, the Selassie banner, if we cannot unite among ourselves? There are 5 contemporary issues that the CPAIM, and the Pan-African the Caribbean Pan-African indigenous movement that have united us without contention. One, support for and solidarity with the people of Haiti, their sovereignty and opposition to U.S. imperialist invasion under any pretext, guise or complexion. Whether it's the U.S.,
Doesn't
Canada,
matter. Yes.
right, Kenya, they mention here CARICOM. Two, solidarity with the sovereign rights of the indigenous peoples of Essequibo and the citizens of Venezuela and Guyana, with no interference by ExxonMobil, the US, or any outside entity who wants to violate the Caribbean as a zone of peace. Three, last year we held a debate which attracted a great deal of interest on the role of Chinese foreign policy in Africa and the Caribbean, which at times became heated, but generated more light than heat, as some of us saw China's role as primarily proletarian internationalists, and others of us, including some sisters from Jamaica and St. Lucia, who described China's role in their islands as domestic settler colonialism. But we agreed to disagree on the role of China and keep our eyes peeled to not be blinded from reality, regardless of prior perspectives. Four, most recently, we agreed to approach the Sahel States Alliance, Niger, Burkina Faso, Mali, to see how we can assist them in the assertion and safeguard of their sovereignty. How can we assist anyone with anything as a group if we can't unite with each other? That's a question. Five, while we have not reached agreement on the role of vaccines and viruses as biological weapons for ethnic cleansing, we have rejected efforts of some CARICOM heads to declare crime as a public health emergency, as a means to curtail our freedom. And we have collaborated to publish 3 issues of the journal Pan-African World, which has been well received and distributed throughout the world. Again, unity does not mean that we have a uniform line or a democratic centralist position with which we all must agree. It means that an injury to one is an injury to all, and that we will organize and centralize in the struggle for our people's sovereignty and dignity. We are building something meaningful. Let's not do the enemy's work by fighting among ourselves and thereby weakening ourselves and failing our people. Forward together, backward never. Africa for the Africans at home and abroad. Umoja na Uhuru. And this is from the chair, and I want to highlight, chair coordinator of the Caribbean Pan-African Indigenous Movement, our comrade Felipe Noguera. And I thought it was important to read what he said and share that, because this is what we were saying.
Yes.
This is what we've been saying, yes, please, Baba.
And that is what Marcus Messiah Garvey and our ancestors of 1920 said. Maybe not in those words, but in the words of the Negro People's Rights of the World, the words of our Constitution, because it is not about one over the other, but one united together to change the conditions of African people across the world. We may not agree, and religion is always a choice anyway.
Mm-hmm.
It's your spiritual path.
Right.
It should not be your political entity. Because when it comes to us, unity has to circumvent our differences. So what you've just read, I would 100% reiterate and support, because we as a people have to put unity above all. We have to put an establishment of an African government for African people worldwide, so that wherever we are, there can be a voice that speaks for us. We have to have a unified voice. The UNIAACL, I'm going to say RC 2020, based on the history of the UNIAACL, gave a unified voice. 1920 gave a unified voice, a platform. So if you take the actions of our ancestors in 1920 And then you take what you just read,
Mhm.
it would be 1920 done over in 2024.
Correct. Correct. That was the whole reason why, and listening to you, Baba, and I want to give a special shout out to the first Assistant President General, Baba Senghor Baye, who's putting comments, as I anticipated, into the platform. And I want to share those with persons that are not able to really hear and engage. I think it's important, that people know that, Garveyism rehabilitation underway globally. We exonerate and emulate the structure building for our younger generations to rise to our traditional greatness. Forward march. And I'm very grateful for one of our awesome sisters, like no other, who really, a business partner, a spiritual friend, but like, what is that term y'all like to say? Y'all like to say ride or die. I like to say ride or live long. But right, Sister Stormy Gordon, I'm saying, grateful for her sharing her perspective, what she's hearing and listening to in terms of knowledge versus history. And just the facts are amazing on this platform. And I'm very grateful for her ongoing support in a lot of different ways, to just really share with us, a couple of things that she's hearing, what she's seeing, how it's connecting to her own work. I've also placed in the chat a platform video that was shared with us by Ambassador David Comisian, who serves as the ambassador of the Republic of Barbados to CARICOM, as well as, representing Barbados, as well as St. Vincent and Grenadines, which takes me to that line that I'm going to keep. I'll put those links as well. But to our sisters and brothers that are hearing this, that are seeing this, we are sending solidarity,
Yes.
well wishes to our sisters and brothers that are still in that disaster recovery crisis from Hurricane Beryl that devastated St. Vincent Grenadines and surrounding islands, particularly Union Island, as well as Petite Martinique. I think it's important in Grenada, the impact of the hurricane on the neighboring island Carriacou, as well as certain portions of Jamaica. Specifically, I'm going to speak to St. Elizabeth and those surrounding areas that are in the heart of where our brothers and sisters of the Accompong Maroon community are. We were at least able to speak to persons. We want to thank Carib Newsroom and the Temple of Inner Peace in Jamaica, based in Mount Airy. And I want to highlight that this is more northwest of the island of Jamaica, and they experienced significant damages. And it was through Sister Queen Nana Sharon Oshun Paris Chambers and her beloved husband, Theo Chambers. I call him the AI brethren like no other, doing publications around AI. But even in the midst of this, they were still assisting us in getting firsthand reports of what's taking place in Jamaica during the storm, right after the storm, and then up to the time where people started getting power and other utilities restored. And we want to thank them significantly for letting us know. We want to send out a special shout out to Chief Odwe, Chief Richard Curry of the Sovereign Accompong Nation community in Jamaica, along with his ANUL is hard to describe beyond being a powerful leader in technology and on the ground, and just being able to give the brothers and sisters in Accompong another voice, and providing, whether it was to get generators, whether it was to get Starlink so that people could have some degree of communication. I just wanted to share that most humbly, because it's through efforts that they have established with the IDO International Network. And I'm going to keep coming to that. And I encourage people, learn more about all of the different reconnections around the global African diaspora kingdoms that are authentically on the ground, working with people on the ground to help in these different efforts. But I encourage persons, you can easily go to the government networks for Jamaica, Grenada, St. Vincent Grenadines, and you'll be able to see what is already in place. So persons, every dollar helps, every contribution helps, so that we can get our sisters and brothers to some degree of normalcy. And this is coming from someone that has survived multiple Cat 5 hurricanes right here in the Virgin Islands, including losing homes and all personal possessions. So I'm saying we're resilient.
Absolutely.
We're resilient, you know, and it's with that effort of African fundamentalism and that vibration that Garvey in that whirlwind, because people were saying
Mhm.
stuff like that. They were sending us videos while the storm was going on, and they were like, Garvey's in the whirlwind. I said, pause, please go inside your house.
But
Please.
he is in the whirlwind.
I hear you.
He
Hear,
said, "Look for me in the whirlwind.
hear
I
you.
will bring tens of millions of African men and women back to the forefront in order to change the conditions of African people." I know we face storms, but for all truth and purposes, we have to understand the storm that we raised, because we are the storm that America fears. We
Mhm.
are the storm.
Mhm.
Our Generation Z, our young people are saying, we are the next wave.
Right. Correct. Correct. And I think that that's pretty, you know, there's a wide breadth of things that I desired, and I'm looking forward to having one of our comrade sisters, Nana Abina Grace James, you know, linked very closely with the sixth region African Diaspora Alliance of Tanzania, you know, and she is very critical within this African Union, African Diaspora High Council piece that's establishing different networks throughout the international community. I think, you know, her presentation on right to return during the side event that took place in Accra, Ghana this afternoon, well, what would have been our morning, their afternoon. We're looking forward to having her and others that were presenting to share with us some of the content, because again, many of the conversations, to hear people highlight about the UNIAACL RC 2020 and particularly about the UNIA ACL. And then it allowed for us to hear that the work of the RC 2020, people are listening, people are viewing, people
Yes.
are engaging, you know. So there's, you know, our decrees of Ma'at that are bringing together relationships, you know, whether it's with Basani, whether it's with, you know, Anu Parent, whether it's
Yes.
with other organizational entities, Adasi and others, and the list is long. And I know that Baba Senghor can give me the cheat sheet for the next broadcast. You know, we would like to be able to continue to have these type of conversations so people know
And
what
and
is, what
and I
exists.
was going to say that under the first Assistant President General, former President General of the UNIA, Brother Senghor Baye, the Ma'at agreement has been moved about the world. And it is extremely important. What is recognized is that is a unity without uniformity. That is our ability to work with each other, even if we don't have the 100% the same idea. There is truly a concept of building an independent African nation that is the motivator that's bringing about this unity, that's bringing about this camaraderie. Because you and I may not always agree, but we always agree on the liberation and the establishment of a government for African people worldwide.
Right.
And I say that for this reason, because in 2014, as we celebrated 100 years of the UNIAACL, as we are doing today and celebrating, I think it's 120 years of the UNIAACL. And I tried to do the math earlier, so forgive me if I'm off a year or two. But understand, it's been over 120 years from
Right.
1920. So now we're at 2020 and it's 2024. So over 100 years.
Mhm.
Understand, over 100 years. And this concept, this philosophy of the UNIA ACL RC 2020 has not wavered. It
Right.
has not shifted. It
Right.
has been committed. Yes, there's been other entities. I kid you not. Under the time of the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey in 1926, there was more than one UNIA. So let the world understand that. Let the world understand that when Garvey was in prison, there was a break within the UNIA, but there has never been a break in those who have been consistent with the concept and philosophy of the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey. There has
Mhm.
never been a break. There's been changes because people have had different views. They wanted different things. But what Garvey wanted was a unified African nation to speak for African people, regardless of where you lived. He wanted a government that spoke on your behalf. He wanted to build on the continent of Africa a government for African people. UNIAACLRC 2020 is committed to bringing about that dream, because that dream is our reality. It is our truth. It is how we shall survive the next wave of racism that's under the flag of Make America Great Again. That's only stand on racism again. And Negroes may not want to believe it, and they may not want to see it, because you've come so far, but you have not come far at all. You are still where our ancestors were. You just don't have physical chains.
And that's what I think is why we're doing our best this evening, to just give like a little bit of context to a number of things that are happening globally. And again, this could easily have been a broadcast about everything. We could have gone from West Papua New Guinea to New Zealand to Australia to Venezuela to Argentina to Ecuador to French Guiana to St. Martin to Dominica to the Virgin Islands to the 48 contiguous US, all over the continent, Europe, and we would have still not covered everything that's impacting people of African, and you're going to keep hearing me saying, ancient, ancestral, African, original people. No one's more indigenous than us. That term indigeneity, that's another conversation that we're going to have in the future, as well as the diaspora.
You mentioned earlier the diaspora. Yes, we got to change that too.
Yes.
I'm an African. I ain't in the diaspora. I'm an African. Regardless of where I live, regardless of where I may stand, what country or land, I'm a person of African descent. I'm not a diaspora. I'm not separate from. I'm a part of. That is what Garvey was pushing. We are a part of. The UNIA, ACL, and RC 2020 will revamp this, establish a citizenship program under the leadership of Senghor Baye, former President General. And under Farouk Muhammad, our Consul General, I became a citizen of the UNIAACL. I'm a citizen of the UNIAACL-RC 2020, which is the entity that is a part of all African nations, all African nation states. There are several of us, and we shall reinstitute that citizenship program so that we can no longer be held hostage by the term, okay, you diaspora, you like separate from, you over there because you was moving. I had no choice in that movement. I have a choice in the movement going forward.
Correct. And I think that that's the part that came up today, and I'm looking forward to having us joined, with some of our UNIA, ACL, RC 2020 comrades, brethren, and sistren, as well as from other organizations that are willing to come together and speak truth to power in these types of platforms. What persons will also notice that's being posted on this as I'm speaking are the links, so that persons can deal with the respective governments in St. Vincent Grenadines, as well as Jamaica, as well as Grenada and Carriacou, so that you can provide some form of support, some form of engagement, however small, however minor you may think it is. It might be something in the corner of your house that you may not realize will be really important. Anything that's providing solar power, anything that's providing some, sanitation pieces, medical supplies, in addition, not just clothes, because that's part of it, but just remember that people have to start to think of washing the clothes, cleaning the water, having food access, making sure that they're healthy and well during this time, to minimize any outbreaks of anything, whether it's malaria, cholera. I'm just being straight. So that people, dengue, we have to think of these things because we're speaking in the tropics. So I'm just sharing some of these pieces. I want to give thanks to, again, the Whirlwind Reasonings, One African Commission, Race First. Thank you so much for that, First Assistant President General, Baba Senghor Baye. We're going to keep that truth to power. I think that we've covered what we could cover And I like to be respectful of persons' times. I know we started a little off center. We were scheduled to start at the top of the hour and we've gone a little bit over. But I just would like for you to share any closing reflections, any closing comments you'd like to share as our President General of the UNIAACLRC 2020.
And in closing statements, the One African Commission is established on the continent of Africa under the leadership of the Third Assistant President General, Chief Fode. He has put together a commission and a structure so that we can address challenges on the continent of Africa. I think, and thank Baba Senghor for First Assistant President General for bringing that to the forefront. But I also want to stop for a brief moment and say to people who are listening and understanding that our movement, our entity is more than a movement. It's a global structure. We are building the response to our enslavement, incarceration, our political subjectation, because the government of the UNIA is going to be able to speak to that. The UNIAACLRC 2020 is extremely important because as we speak, Africa listens, and as Africa speaks, we listen. And we recognize that there has to be a unifying voice for all of us across the globe.
Okay.
We have to hear our youth, not just from Kenya, but our youth wherever they are, that are saying to us, not enough, more is necessary. And we have to respond to our youth and incorporate their energy and efforts in order to bring about change. We can change our conditions, but the energy and the engine are those of the next generation. I know y'all call them Generation Z, and you call them Generation Alpha. But I will say to you, all of those who come from people of African descent, all of the young people in the 30s and 40s and 50s and 20s and teenagers, all of you will make a difference in the world. And it will be the world of African people first, because that will change the world for people globally. One God, one aim, one destiny, one Africa.
One Africa. And with that, I want to thank you, Baba PG of the UNIAACLRC 2020, Akili, Malik, and Nkrumah. And for everyone that has taken some time to share with us this evening, I want to give a special shout out to one of my sister friends, Sister Queen Amelia, for just letting me use her environment for me to do certain things here this evening as well. Because I'm literally in the rainforest on the top of it, making sure that we have signal and all of these other things. It's been a lot going on here in St. Croix, Virgin Islands. But just remember that we're always looking forward to being able to share the way that we can work together and show the love for one another with respect. And at the same time, keep that revolutionary fervor. So we're sending a lot of powerful energies to our youth, our elders, everyone intergenerationally connected in between. And we know that we have a commitment to one another because culture heals humanity. Land is our foundation, and spiritual harmony unifies us. We do all that we can to maintain truth, justice, order, reciprocity, balance, divine righteousness, and harmony. And as we said, when AST speaks, we authentically are building a new legacy. And with that, we say, live free, live well, and definitely live safe. And we'll just kind of tune into a little bit of that vibe of Africa We Love You, just a little bit longer.
Every last semblance of African spirit and skill, but destiny must unfold, prophecy must fulfill. Emancipation is a mountain, it's a real steep hill, and to get to the top of we is such a thrill. That's why from Cape Town to Cairo, Barbados to Brazil, no matter where we were taken, we are African still, and we will heal those emotional scars, and we will reclaim everything that's ours, and we will retake our place amongst the stars, and we will redeem our ancestors.
Give thanks, family. What's up?
What's that?